And that's it. We are semi-live on the internet. How's it going?
Good. How you doing, Eric?
Fantastic. That used to be how I started the other ones because we were actually live, you know?
Right.
And I didn't realize I was doing it until someone pointed out that I started every episode with, and that's it. We're live on the internet. It was a weird tick that I developed for some reason. But,
well, it works.
Yeah. So I was just complimenting you on your fancy background.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm getting to understand Zoom meetings much better now that I'm,
yeah.
forced to use it. So.
Yeah, and by the way to share that with me, so I could also do that. It's nice. I really appreciate your camaraderie there, man.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. You just wanted to show me up. I get it. It's fine. Yeah, I mean, I've got this nice office here.
I like the office. It looks official.
Yeah. It's a small office and a much larger office. I'm kind of deliberately tucked away back in a hole back here, which makes me and everyone else happy. So it works out. Yeah.
Well, I figured I'd throw a background in because, last week it was, you could see my Mets office, and I figured I'm gonna tune out half of America, or probably 99% of America who can't stand the Mets are Mets fans. So
all that Mets fans. So funny you say that. A future blog post of mine is coming. I don't know when. I've got a list, and I don't do them in order. Is that you can be successful with 99% of people hating you, because if there's 7 billion people in the world and only 1% are your fans, that's 70 million people.
Yeah.
So you can get by with 1%, and
I'll take it.
As long as if you've got a really committed 1%, then that's actually better than having a larger lukewarm 10%, right? So
see, there you go, perspective.
Yeah,
Perspective's powerful.
You're better off with depth than width, in my opinion.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, you would have accrued all the diehard Mets fans, and that would have been our base.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know how many diehard Mets fans there are left anymore. So
you would have got both of them. I promise.
That's right. Yeah. me and whoever else was masochistic enough to sit through all this. So
yeah, you and one of your 4 children. That's
there you go.
Not even the other 2, just one.
Yeah. Yep.
Does your wife like the Mets or sports in general?
She's not really a sports fan. She'll go to games with me, and she'll root for, obviously if I'm watching them on TV, she'll ask, "Oh, how they doing?" And usually they're losing. And she go, "Oh, okay, so nothing's changed."
Right.
But she's not against it. I mean, when I met her, she was a Yankee fan, and but she's come around. And my daughter's. I am a diehard Mets fan. Obviously, I mean, my office is Mets. Reese's nursery was all Mets. So my daughters have all been programmed, and when I say programmed, I literally mean it. One of the first things my daughters have ever learned to say is, "Who can't you marry?" And they know the answer. It's a Yankee fan.
Yankee
fan. So, and they were 3 and they were doing that. So, but if I brought Melina in right now and I said, "Melina, who can't you marry?" She'd be like, "Oh, Yankee fan." In fact, my oldest daughter's 15, and that time has started where she's starting to show an interest in boys and stuff. And so she had mentioned this one boy, and my first question was like, "Is he a Yankee fan?" And she's like, "He's not a Yankee fan, Dad." I'm like, "Okay, that's fine. We'll bring him over." So,
I think the key to that, by the way, if you have daughters, and I don't have any, so this is just my opinion, is that whatever guy they bring over, you hug and kiss on the face and tell him he's great, and no matter who he is, what he looks like, what his deal is, because the minute you're like, "Not that guy sucks," that's the dude she's gonna marry and have children with. So
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's what happened with me and my wife. So
see, there you go. Yeah, well, make sure you accept whoever she brings home. That way you're not encouraging through disencouraging, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm definitely not that. I'm not that dad anyhow. So I think if a kid came over here to meet me for the first time, first of all, they would know way too much about me by default, because there's way too much about me on the internet. So
right.
If I tried to be the tough guy, they'd be like, "Don't you go around talking about kindness to everyone?"
Yeah.
So it kind of kills that whole ability to come across as this hard-nosed tough guy that's gonna intimidate them. So it's but yeah, no Yankee fans. So any future boyfriends for Abigail? No Yankee fans.
No Yankee fans.
That's right.
So let's check this out. So I am a terrible sports fan. I know that Mets are baseball, and that's literally about it.
Well, that's good. That's a start.
Yeah, so I'm halfway there. So we were going to talk about. So you had planned to have a guest on to talk about.
I did.
What were they going to talk about?
Well, my plan was to have a counselor / social worker come on to talk about the kind of the psychological effects that this whole situation's having on our kids. You know, because I think as adults, you know, we tend to see the world through our own eyes first. And if we don't have kids, obviously that's probably our only worldview. And then when you do have kids, when you have kids, your worry is always about them. I mean, you know, kind of, you almost become secondary as a parent, and you know, it's always, oh, what can I do for my kids? How are they going to respond? But I think when it comes to a situation like this, that's new to both, new to the kids, new to the parents, that since we don't have experience to lean on, it's uncharted territory. I think it makes that parenting side of it much harder, because I think a good deal of parenting actually comes from our experience as kids and what we saw from our parents and what we learned and what we saw worked and what we thought didn't work. And it's like, oh, okay, you know, I'm going to try this. And so, you know, and I mean, I definitely applied that. You know, my father and I are basically polar opposites of each other. So, you know, my dad was kind of the badass biker dude who had tattoos and, you know,
he was that hard-nosed guy your daughter's boyfriend would be scared of.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I always joke with people because, you know, teenagers rebel. And when I was a teenager, you know, my way of rebelling, my father was, you know, captain of the football team, you know, prom king, you know, and then badass biker dude. So he was all those things, super popular. So my way of rebelling was becoming a complete shut-in and nerd. And bookworm. So that was my way of becoming a rebel. Like, oh yeah, Dad, you're a badass. Well, I'm gonna be a nerd. So there you go.
Watch this.
Yeah. So yeah, that was my rebellion. So but yeah, like I really think that as parents, we try to project our experiences as a way of, you know, using that as our probably our number one parenting tool. And in this case, we don't have an experience. This is completely uncharted territory. You know, we can't recall back, oh, how did I feel when I went through the pandemic? Well, I'm going through it right now, and I'm not a kid. So I thought it would be important to try to get some, at least, insight into how, you know, the child's brain works and how they might process this. You know, I saw, it was funny, but it made me also think. There was a video online that showed these 2 3-year-old toddlers. And there was like a nanny cam on them, and they were going to bed, but they were pretending they were talking about this situation, but like joking around, like, oh, you're a virus, and you know, you're sick, and we're in quarantine, and I'm like, oh my God, you're like, you forget what kids pick up, and you don't realize, I mean, they are complete sponges. And even Melina, she's my youngest, she's 5, you know, she's picked up some stuff, but she can't quite process it. So, you know, here we are 2.5 weeks in, and she can't, you know, she still can't go outside, you know, well, she can go outside, but, you know, we told her, you know, you gotta stay away from, you know, your friends on the block. So you gotta, you know, 5 feet away. And she doesn't even know what 5 feet is. So I'm like, you know, it's this far away, right? But she keeps asking why. And she's like, when can I go back to school? Like, she doesn't understand why she's not in school. And so I, you know, trying to relate to that, I can't. You know, yesterday I took her, you know, I just wanted to get her out. We have a little, it's not like a 7-Eleven, but it's a little convenience store that I can literally walk to from my house.
Like a bodega?
Yeah, it's called the Handy Pantry. And it really is. I mean, it's perfectly named. It is totally handy to have it right here. And especially considering the times, like they actually have toilet paper. They have everything you need.
Right, because you said you live pretty far outside. Like,
I do. This is like this random. It is this random shop in the middle of nowhere that just happens to be within walking distance of my house. It's great, and so I can walk right up there. If we need milk, I can go up and get it. You know, I'm kind of honestly, I've been spoiled by this because it's right there. And so yesterday, my wife had said, you know, oh, we need some onions. I'm like, I don't have onions. All right, I'll run up to the Handy Pantry. And, no one's there because I live in a small town. And so I'm like, you know what, I'll take Melina. I just told her as I'm walking up, I said, just hold daddy's hand. Don't touch anything. Just stay away from everything. And, she saw me. I walked into the store and I opened the door with my elbow, trying to be good. And then I get in, I get the onions and the peppers, and then she's touching everything. And I'm like, Melina, stop. And she's like looking at me like, what? And I'm like, don't touch anything. And she's like, she can't comprehend it. And so I go and pay, and I go to walk out the door, and I tell her, oh, Melina, don't touch the door. Daddy will open it. She immediately grabs the bar, pushes it open. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So then as we're walking home, I said, all right, sweetie, make sure you can't touch your face. All right. Just don't do anything. We'll wash your hands as soon as you get home. First thing she does. And I'm like, okay, I failed, parent fail. So I get back home, and my wife, she didn't even know I took her. So I get back home, and as I'm walking in, I said to Melina, okay, got to go wash your face and your hands right now. And my wife's like, why are you doing that? And I'm like, oh, I took her to Handy Pen. She's like, why'd you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. I just wanted to get her out. But that whole time, after she washed her hands, she came back, and I tried to explain to her why this is important. And I realized she's fine. She doesn't get it. So sometimes they just need to take our word for it. But, they don't have that context. And it makes me think, how is she processing all this? And, last night she started complaining that her belly was hurting and that things were bothering her. And I think with little kids, a lot of those emotional problems, they kind of manifest physically. And, I would bet dollars to donuts that stomach ache that she had isn't really a stomach ache. It's this inability to process everything that she went through yesterday, trying to understand what's going on. And so I looked on, I've been looking for resources as a parent. I want to try to figure this out and find the best way to help my kids. So I had gone to this website, which I've looked at before. It's just kidshealth.org. And they have a whole kind of frequently asked questions about how to relate this whole situation to your kids, regardless of the age level. And the first one, and rule number one, and honestly, I never even thought of doing this, so I've already failed because I've missed out on rule number one. It says, find out what your child already knows. So, literally ask them, what do you know? So, it's funny because if you ask those three-year-olds, they apparently knew they were in quarantine and all that. I don't even think Melina understands that. So, but that's step one. Ask them. And it says here, follow your children's leads. Some kids may want to spend time talking, but if your kids don't seem interested and don't ask a lot of questions, that's okay. So that's important. Don't push them. Obviously, we don't want to ask them if they don't want to talk. They give you some examples. Have you heard grown-ups talking about the new sickness that's going around? Ways to kind of ease yourself into talking to them about it.
Yeah, so better than, so did you hear everybody's going to die?
Yeah,
mommy and daddy are going to be around for a while. Yeah.
Right. And, I realize it's funny what you realize after the fact. I was on the phone with my mom yesterday, and my mom's down in Florida and I'm up here. And I for the first time, I've always felt kind of distanced from my mom because of the fact she moved down to Florida. And there's always been an issue with that because when I was in college, my wife and I, we were just boyfriend and girlfriend at the time, but we had planned on staying. I went to school down in Virginia, and I had planned on staying in Virginia. And I remember calling my mom and saying, I think Sam and I are going to stay here in Virginia and, do our teaching certification here and become teachers here in Virginia. And my mom guilted me into coming back home. She's like, you should come back home. Your family's here. There's a university right around the corner. You can stay home and you don't have to pay for for room and board and any of that. You can go get your master's there. And she just kept guilting me, constantly reminding me that my family was home.
We had the same mom.
Yeah. So I moved back home. And then I moved back home. And within a year of me moving back home, my mom moved to Florida.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, thanks. So you left me here in the most expensive place on earth, basically, to live in Long Island. And now you're gone. And so I've always given her a hard time about doing that, but I never felt totally distanced because I knew, I can go down and see her. And right now I can't. And then now you have this situation going on. So yesterday when I was talking to my mom, I have a great relationship with her. I'm very upfront with her. I've always been able to tell her anything. So, my mom had asked me, she's having new floors installed. And she's like, what can I do to clean it? And should I have the guys wearing masks? And she's like, I'm going to stay away from them. And I'm like, all right, mom. I have obviously a background in biology and virology actually specifically. So I kind of know this stuff. So I'm explaining to her, basically what she has to worry about, what she doesn't have to worry about, what she can do. And she's like, okay. Now Melina's listening to all this, and but I'm telling her things, bad things that could happen, and what she could expect if that happens, and my mom's like, all right, this is just too much. I'm like, Mom, just don't lick your floors when they come in. You're fine. I was like, otherwise, I said, don't worry about it. I said, you're not going to go dying on me. And Melina picked up on that. She heard me say that, and she said, is something going to happen to Oma? Is Oma sick? And I said, no, sweetie, it's just what's going on. And again, I didn't see her connected. So, I never thought of asking her, what she knows. What do you know? So, which I find interesting, because they do hear everything. And then, like I said, I don't think they can always process it. So the next thing they offer is say,
I've heard that same advice, by the way, not just for this, but for any kind of thing that's happening in the news, so, from 9/11 to, I'm only thinking of giant things now because we're doing coronavirus, but anything that's going on, I've heard that same advice is the first step is to, find out, what they're already working with before you get into it,
Yeah, and absolutely. And, in some ways you would think I would have experience with this because, my middle daughter, Lorelai, was 5, Melina's age when Reese passed away. And, that was completely uncharted territory for us and how to take care of our kids. Again, being in uncharted waters, I had never lost a sibling. I had a sister, but I obviously didn't lose her.
Right.
And I didn't know, Samantha and I were completely unprepared for how to deal with their loss. And actually found it incredibly frustrating that we couldn't find resources for the kids specifically who've lost siblings. Now they have tons of bereavement groups for kids, but since sibling loss is much rarer than losing a parent or a grandparent, most of the programs are built around loss of a parent or a grandparent, and very, very little is for support for kids who've lost siblings. And so we couldn't find that support network, and we kind of cobbled it together, speaking to this clinical psychologist or this licensed social worker and, some of the guidance counselors at school, trying to figure out, what's the best way to help the kids through. And, I think that the thing that I discovered more than anything is that each kid processes things completely differently. Abigail, her reaction to Reese's death was literally the polar opposite of Lorelai's. Abby tended to keep everything inside and project, confidence and project that she was okay. And then Lorelai was literally the opposite. It was, you could see the depression, you could see the loss. It manifested itself, physically. It manifested itself in her emotional outbursts. And so, it was different and didn't know how to handle it. So obviously we had reached out and gone to counseling and spoken to counselors and gotten some rules. And the thing that struck me in reading this list is that a lot of what we were told by these grief counselors is stuff that they're telling us to do here. So I guess it is, you're right.
I read a psychologist writing about, not kids, but adults going through this. And the headline of the article was, that thing you're feeling right now is grief. Like right. That's the emotion you're feeling. That unsettling thing you have, that you're not sure what it is. You're actually grieving. You're grieving, the loss of, what your life before and, the knowable and the whole thing. But yeah, that was the whole point of the article, is that, what we're all experiencing is actually grief. So that makes sense that there's some, analogies between what you got from a grief counselor and what the list is talking about.
Yeah. And, one thing I was reminded from the grief counselors who specialize in kids was that, children process grief differently than an adult would. An adult processes their grief by comparing it to background experience and processing it through their, their years of experience, where a child doesn't have that. So they don't have that foundation to build on. So their processing of grief becomes something very different. And in order to help them through that, there are some rules you should follow that can help alleviate some of those symptoms. And, it's like I said, I didn't put two and two together that, it's a grief, and I did see it with my older daughter, Abby, though. Like I said, she's 15, and I had a conversation with her 2 days ago, and she kind of just came out, and she's like, you don't understand how this is. I can't see my friends. I can't be with them. And I looked at her, I said, actually, Abby, I can, because we're all going through this. I'm going through this too. She's like, I'm like, I can't see my friends either. She's like, you don't have any friends. I'm like, yes, I do. Just you never see me get to go out with them because I'm constantly doing stuff with you.
Right.
And it's like, it's perspective, that her perspective was different because, she's an adolescent and, so they see things different. So, so it does say here, offer comfort and honesty, which this was rule number 1 for us. Focus on helping your child feel safe, but be truthful. So you don't want to lie to them. You don't want to be like, oh, everything's fine. The world is just great and, everything will be perfect. That, you don't want to offer more detail than what you have to. But you do want to tell them what's going on, that they're okay. So, you would say something like, and this is what we were told with Reese's passing with the girls, because one of their concerns was that, oh my God, this is going to happen to me. And so you have to be honest, but you also want to keep them safe. And so I know with the girls, we constantly reminded them that, what happened to Reese isn't that common. And that, if we do the things to prevent it, we add those layers of prevention, that they'll be okay. And, so you keep it simple and you keep it concise and you let them know that, they will be okay, and reassure them with some information to back it up. So, so I guess in this case, you're telling your kids, hey, listen, yeah, we're stuck in the house. We're here, we have to be, but, you're going to be okay. And the reason we're doing this is so that, the sick people who are there who could get you sick, well, you're not going to come in contact with them, so you won't get sick. So that's why we're doing this. So keep it in terms that are simple for the kids to understand.
So do you think, because I've thought about this, I thought about my my grandmother, like so many other people, grew up, or she became an adult during the Great Depression, right? She was born in 1909. So she went through the whole Great Depression thing, right? So she had all those Great Depression kind of cliche personality quirks where she hoarded stuff, right? And she wouldn't get rid of, she would throw things away, and she picked up change, and, she would hold on to food until it was way past spoiled, and, all the stuff that people did in that time, because they kind of built this habit, and then it stuck with them for the rest of their life. You couldn't shake it, right? Even though the time didn't call for it anymore. I wonder if kids that are living in this right now are going to grow up with kind of an aversion to personal contact, to thinking, a little bit more of a germaphobe, which is maybe not a bad thing, by the way. But yeah, I wonder if we're going to see people have like a Great Depression style personality trait. People are going to say, oh, he's, he was from the coronavirus era, so that's why he doesn't shake hands, or, whatever the case might be.
Well, I actually read an article. I don't remember where it was, so I can't cite it, but I had read an article, I think it was out of the New York Times, was that what we're going through right now is basically going to change society forever going forward. And that the experience that we're sharing now will be, it's going to just continue on. And in some ways it'll stick with us. So I think you're right on the nose that we're going to see that these kids are going to respond for the rest of their lives in a specific way that's a result of what they've experienced here. And like you said too, I think some of it's great. I used to, as a bio teacher, I used to tell my students all the time about, how pathogens work and how sickness works. And, when I would do the immune system, I would talk to them about, hygiene and good, practicing sterile technique. And they're like, but I'm not doing lab experiments. I'm like, no, but it still applies. Like, do you guys even know how to wash your hands? So I used to actually do a demonstration of how to properly wash your hands. and, would show them, you wash your hands, you soak them up, you got to get them, around around the fingers and under the nails. And I said, then when you rinse the water off, do you ever watch the doctors in the TV shows, how they wash their hands off? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, you ever notice they put it under the water and they let it run off? And I said, that's because you want the bacteria and the germs to get off. And I said, if you understand how soap works, soap is slippery. And the whole point of soap is so that you basically make the surface of your skin slippery. And that slipperiness causes the bacteria and the germs to literally fall off. And that is the best way to get rid of them. And then I used to go on my rant about antibacterial soap and how terrible that is, because you don't want to be killing the bacteria, you just want to get rid of them.
Right.
And getting rid of them is the best bet. And so, I would show them all that, and I would go through all these techniques, because I remind them, people that one thing people leave out, they say knowledge is power. I say knowledge is paranoia. So when you know too much, especially about this stuff, and I understand, pathogens, and I understand how viruses, propagate. So it freaked me out when I had learned all this stuff back in college. I was like, man, this is kind of scary stuff. And so I became a little bit of a germaphobe myself. And, to the point where my family always picks on me. Like, I won't drink, I will not share a cup with anyone. That's like, I'm not going to do it. Not ever. So get away from me. Like, I won't even share it with my family. And so, and they see me, like, when I'm in a bathroom, I remind my family, and I reminded my students, that little metal plate on the bottom of doors, that's a kick plate. You're supposed to use your foot to open it. Like, you do things like that so that you're not touching things. And if you can, use your elbow to open a door, do it. And I've always done this stuff since I learned this. But the funny thing is, now I see people going into stores now, and I see them doing that. And it's like, all right, well, maybe this will stick with you. So I'm hoping with the kids that this does become something that sticks with them. And, that's going to help us overall, because this is a, big part of how disease is transferred. So
my former dental hygienist, who's now our Lifesaver pool vents dealer of Fort Myers, actually, she moved over there, and she's doing a fantastic job. She installs a ton of pool vents now on the west coast of Florida. She gave a whole dissertation the other day on glove use, because she was saying everybody's using gloves wrong. So yep. She was explaining, single use, you put them on, you touch one thing. Now, you've touched that one thing. You can't touch anything else besides that thing now, because they're dirty, right? You got to imagine they're covered in slime, and anything you touch now is going to get that slime on it from whatever you already touched. So, if you touched a shopping cart, you can't now touch your food, right? You got to take off those gloves, put on new gloves to pick up the box of cereal, and then you got to put on new gloves to touch the next thing,
Yep.
Otherwise you're cross-contaminating. But yeah, she's talking about hand washing, like you're talking about. And I've never heard it described this way. She was like, yeah, and you got to go up high on your arms because germs crawl up your arms. Like, you get them on your hands and they crawl up, which was kind of a weird way to think about it. I've never heard anybody say, they literally crawl up your arms,
Yeah, well, and that's why, too, I used to explain to my students, if you watch the doctors on the medical shows, when they stick their hands under the water, they do this. They put their hands under the water this way, not down. Because if you go down, you rinse the bacteria that are up on your upper arms back down onto your hands. Congratulations, you have now failed. So you don't want that. So that's why you stick your hands under this way, so that the water's coming down and washing the bacteria off, so they are going down your arm, so that any bacteria that may be here, well, it might seem like a foot to you, but to them it's like, it's 500 miles.
Right.
So that's what you want. But yeah, they move, obviously, and they have the ability to well, some viruses don't, but a bacteria can. So yeah, you don't want that, you don't want that there. So, good sterile technique. It's funny, a dental hygienist would have learned that. Anyone who works in the medical field learns this. Anyone who works in the science field has to learn sterile technique. And then most other people don't. So, I would tell my students, too, when you sneeze, if I see you sneezing into your hands, I'm going to kick you out of my classroom. Because your hands are the worst place to sneeze, because now you congratulations, now all these pathogens are on your hand, and I'm going to touch this, and this, and now you've contaminated this surface. So, we used to do bacterial samples too. We'd grow cultures, and we'd collect samples from all over the school, we would do it from, doorknobs, and we would do it from the desktops, and we would do it from the toilets. I wouldn't have them go into the toilets, but I would do it. I would take a sample from around the toilet seat, and I'd grow them and show them. And the thing that blew their minds was that, honestly, one of the ones that grew the least was the toilet seat, which is what everyone thinks is so dirty.
Right.
And the thing that actually got the most bacteria every year, and this is gross, the thing that got the most bacteria every year was we had a little, like a water fountain that was, it's like just like a soda fountain, but it was just water. And the bacteria around that soda fountain, that water fountain, was always the highest.
Oh,
and I'm like, and that's where you're going to go get your water, and that's where you're immediately putting things into your mouth. So it would make them really think twice, and the surfaces of their desks, they were awful, like loaded with bacteria. So, and it's funny because after I teach some of my kids this, I'd see them come in with they'd have the hand sanitizer, and they'd be wiping their desk down as they came in. And I'd say, well, there you go, and I would point out, hey guys, all the dust that's in the room, or the dust that's in your house, do you know what that is? And they're like, no, what is it? I thought it was just dirt. And I'm like, no, it's mostly dead skin and bacteria. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And all that dead skin is food for those bacteria. So they're happy living in that dust. And the kid, oh my God. So now every time they saw dust, they freaked out. So like I said, knowledge isn't always power. Sometimes it's paranoia. So, but, I think coming back to how we treat with the kids is you have to mitigate how you kind of take this information and make it so that it doesn't make them paranoid. And, so I think that's important. So I think that's where the reassurance comes in, that, okay, here's the reality. I mean, if you're telling a kid, this is how things are, but it's going to be okay. You'd also need to reassure them that it's going to remain that way. That, and if you see somebody that's sick, that, okay, stay away from them. And, just because someone's sick too doesn't necessarily mean they have this bad disease. And, I think that's important to give them that perspective, but that's even hard to do for adults. Cause I said this to my mom yesterday too, when I was on the phone with her. I said, Mom, and this kind of goes back to your point of, the 1% of the whole population. I said, Mom, there are 360 million Americans people in America right now. I said, if there's 200,000 deaths, that's awful. But that is honestly, statistically speaking, an insignificant number of the population. Probability-wise, your probability of contracting and dying from this disease is still exceedingly low. And that probability is hard for people to wrap their heads around. And so when they see these numbers and they see all these deaths, they start thinking, oh my God, this is going to happen to me. Whereas the reality is it's not very likely. But
at least not yet. Unfortunately, your mom is down here by me in Florida, where we have limited safety protocols. That way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the numbers down here are going to start getting crazy.
Well, I mean, actions have reactions. So, are we going to see a change? Yes. And, but again, I think that reassurance also applies to adults, is that if you understand how this works and you understand that there are protocols that you can use to protect yourself, if you use them, that probability of you getting infected then drops even more. So, I mean, there's a baseline probability that you could have for being infected, for being an idiot, right? For just ignoring everything. And, for every 3 people who maybe get infected, just throwing caution to the wind, there's probably going to be 7 people who threw caution to the wind and got away with it. And those people now, they have their confirmation bias that tells them, see, I'm fine.
Yep.
See, what are you talking about? It's like that person who smoked until they were 95. Oh, see, I smoked my whole life. It didn't affect me. And, they may be the exception to the rule too. But because you saw that, it's like, that's there you go. There's my answer. It's like when people say it's a small world. We say that when that randomly comes up because that's a rare experience. Yeah. So when you have this coincidence where, I remember I was down in Florida. Actually, no, I was in Germany. I was in Berlin, Germany. And there was this lady talking behind me.
I always get Berlin and Florida mixed up too all the time.
Yeah.
I conflate those constantly. Yeah.
Constantly, yeah. And this lady behind me was speaking, and she was clearly from Long Island. That Long Island accent is impossible to miss. And I turn around and I look at her. I'm like, wow, you're from Long Island. And she's like, how'd you know? I'm like,
oh my God, how did you know?
Yeah. I'm like, oh, it was a wild guess. And we started talking, and long story short, we discovered that I had actually taught her niece.
No way.
And so she goes, oh my God, what a small world this is. And the scientist in me immediately looks at her and I go, it's not.
No.
And she goes, no, but you have your proof right here. And I said, no, that's not proof. I was like, that's just anecdotal evidence. I said, you're just taking this one experience to say it confirms your belief. I said, but if I really wanted to test this, how about I go up to everyone else in this cafe and ask them, do we have anything in common?
Right.
And I would pretty much be confident in saying that everyone else is going to say no, that there's no connection.
Right.
Do I then feel compelled to say to each one of those people, wow, we have nothing in common. What a big world this is.
Right.
Which is going to be the norm. But we dismiss that because our brains aren't wired to look at it that way. We look at the things that stand out.
Right.
So, and that becomes our rule. So this paranoia over infection becomes part of that. And it's trying to teach people to find that balance between that paranoia and that understanding is really hard because you have to have all the background. So, and I've struggled with this because I had posted, when this first started, I had tried to post something on Facebook that tried to give some perspective, and I immediately got attacked. They're like, you're dismissing it. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just trying to give you some perspective so that you're not afraid. And I realized that, fear is irrational, and fear comes from, not knowing something too, as well. And I realized, I had a background in this that gave me a sense of confidence that maybe someone else wouldn't have. And I could, in putting myself in their shoes, I realized, oh, I can see how their perspective would take what I'm saying as being, dismissive and we don't want to do that. So I think, it's important to put yourselves in other people's shoes when you're trying to relate a problem to them and say, okay, here's what's really going on, but, let's try to get some perspective on it, which is, obviously important, especially for kids.
It's the same reason why when, I use this example all the time, a batch of bad peanut butter gets a few dozen kids sick, that makes the news. But child drowning, which you and I know is the number one cause of accidental deaths for kids between 1 and 4, doesn't make the news because it's so common, right? Because it happens all the time, in some kind of, backwards logic, that doesn't make any news because it's a common thing, right? And the news doesn't report common things, it reports uncommon things. So, now you've got people scared of peanut butter because 12 kids got sick, but they aren't treating their backyards properly because that's not something publicized by the news because of how common it is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I've actually looked into that. We get this idea that, when something becomes unknown to us or, what we think is known, and that's the dangerous part, when we think we know something.
Yeah, the known knowns and the unknown unknowns. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So when we think we know something, we become secure in our belief and our preeminence in that. And so we dismiss it. So that's the perfect example. And, the thing that stands out, that's what we, that's what we focus on. And that's evolutionary. I mean, that there's a part of that led to our survival. I mean, that whole process, I used to explain this to my students when I would talk about evolution. I'd say, this process of confirmation bias has actually kept us alive as a species. Because here, for example, let's say, you had, some early, cavemen walking around. Now, they don't have textbooks, they don't have the internet, they don't have any form of knowledge other than what they've spoken to each other, what they share verbally. So one caveman's out there foraging, and he's out with his friend, and they see this thing on the ground, and it looks edible, and say it's a mushroom, and he picks it up, and I would say his name was Ugg. So Ugg picks up the mushroom, he eats it, and he drops dead. So his partner, Snug looks at it, goes, oh, mushroom bad. Goes back and tells everyone, don't eat the mushrooms. And so then, because one person died from that mushroom, they say, oh, avoid all mushrooms. Now, is that logical? Not necessarily, but is it helpful? Yes, because if you avoid all mushrooms, then you also avoid the ones that can kill you. Right. And so that works. So then that becomes a rule, right? And so that rule becomes, oh, if I don't eat mushrooms, I'll live. And that's great. as long as you understand that that's not the truth. It's just a basic rule we've used to survive. I said, what the scientist would do is a scientist would question that rule. A scientist would come along and say, well, I understand that that one mushroom killed him, but what about that one? What about the other one? Now, are you going to be willing to be the one who tries the other one? I don't know about that. That's the hard part. But, the scientist is the one who goes, hey, well, maybe there's another mushroom we can eat, and that's, that's how we understand things. Like, originally people used to think that the sun rose up out of the ocean. And, and how did they do that? Well, I mean, if you went to the Aztecs, they would sacrifice a virgin once every year and spill their blood into the water. And guess what? As long as they kept doing that, the sun rose.
Yeah.
Right. So I always wondered, like, who was the one Aztec who goes, excuse me? What if we tried not killing the people and see what happens? Now, imagine that. That one person's got a great idea. But everyone else understanding this rule, they're going to look at it and go, I don't want to risk that.
Right.
And that comes from lack of knowledge. That's a lack of understanding. So, yeah, you have to find this balance between expanding on people's understanding without insulting them and expanding on their understanding without pandering either. So it's hard. It really is. It's hard to get information out properly. And I think the media falls into this. What's easier? Just sensationalize everything. So because people don't question sensationalism, they don't. They don't question fear. Fear, even though fear is irrational, it's something we can relate to. So, I think that's why you see a lot of this. And I think that's why it's really important then to try to, bring it down to a level that your kids can understand and try to, just keep it simple, be reassuring and calm and say, like, hey, it's going to be okay. And give them some sense of control too. Like, they can't control what's going on outside of this. So give them some control in the house. Let them do some things that maybe they couldn't do before. And I think that's also important.
No, it makes good sense. And I think that, I think the majority of kids are going to turn out fine. I think like we were saying earlier, we might see some changed habits in the future. I think some good, some bad, right? I think we're going to see a whole generation of people who know these sanitization practices better than we did, right, growing up.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a whole generation of people who understand disease and virology maybe a little bit better than we did. And then maybe some the other way too. Maybe social distancing becomes part of the zeitgeist going forward,
Well, I think I joked about this last week, but, my wife and I, we tend to be, everyone finds it ironic. Like, you speak to people for a living. I mean, your job is to literally go and speak to a whole bunch of people all at once. And yet the truth is, I just posted this on Facebook, 10 things that, that I don't like that everyone else seems to like.
Right.
I think my number 3 rule was social gatherings. And I had a couple people like, really? I mean, you speak to people, and I was like, yeah, but that's one thing that I do. But as far as parties and social, I've never been a fan, and that's just not something I do. So, is that dichotomy that exists. So, but yeah, it's definitely a change.
So on the, because you do have a background in virology, so I had heard some new, I believe, accurate information that I didn't know yesterday, which doesn't happen very often with this. Usually you're getting the same info over and over again. That the hand washing and the surface stuff is important, but maybe not as important as they initially thought. The vast majority of people who are going to catch this are going to catch it airborne. That it's going to be human to human through the air, and
absolutely
the idea of you touching a surface and then touching your face, and then that's how you catch it isn't nearly as scary as maybe we thought it was.
No, it's not. And actually, remember, I joked with my mother yesterday. This is where when Melina had heard, I told her, don't lick your floors.
Yeah.
And my mom's like, haha, very funny. I said, no, Mom, honestly, your chances of catching this disease through surface contact is extremely low. Yeah. I said, and I tried to explain to her, there's this thing called viral load, which means even if the virus is on the surface. So, I could have the virus on this coffee cup right now. Okay. that doesn't mean I'm going to get infected. And actually, I could like lick the cup where the virus is. That also does not mean I'm going to be infected, because there has to be a certain number of viral particles on the surface for you to actually get infected. Because once it enters my mouth, I have defense mechanisms already. My saliva can start breaking some of the viruses down. They're going to get stuck. They're going to, it's going to go down to my stomach. The hydrochloric acid will start breaking down more of them. What you need is a few viruses to get through all those layers of defense. And even once it gets into your bloodstream, you have these cells called macrophages, which will attack them indiscriminately too. So you have a mechanism that kills a vast majority of these things before they even get into you. That's why you don't get sick all the time. Even for things you've never been exposed to, you don't have an immunity to. And if the load is high enough, though, what happens is that the law of averages says, well, one or two are going to get through, or a few will get through. And so that's where viral load becomes important. So on surfaces, what we call the half-life of a virus means that how long will it take for half of the viral particles to persist, to be able to still infect you? And so they say the half-life on this virus can be anywhere from 12 minutes to 72 hours. I've seen all these different results. So the end of the day, what really matters is that even they talk about all this stuff, the chances of you coming in contact with a surface that's been contaminated with enough of the virus to actually infect you is exceedingly low. And that the most likely way to get infected is to be basically within 3 feet of someone who ejects into the air the particles that can infect you, because that is going to have a tremendous viral load. Plus, it's going to be water-based, because the mucus and stuff and that water becomes a fantastic vessel by which to get these viral particles into your body.
Right. It's kind of like a little force field. It's a shield that the virus can survive in to get into you, right?
Yeah.
Like taking a pill, right? You've got the medicines inside the little capsule. Same thing. It's just, the opposite of that,
Yeah, that's a great analogy. So so person-to-person contact is still by far and away the most likely way for you to get infected, which is why social distancing works so well. Like I said, it's a part of that is understanding those laws of averages and understanding, what your risks are, and it's risk mitigation. So
no, and that made me happy, because I think a lot of people were overemphasizing the gloves and the surfaces and the touching, and it's still important. You were at the handy pantry, trying to avoid touching surfaces, but maybe not as critical as we thought originally.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything you do helps. A way you could visualize this is that, this is like roulette, right? So, or let's say Russian roulette.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that virus is the bullet in the chamber, and the more things you do to prevent the infection is the more bullets you're pulling out of those individual chambers. The more things you do that go against that, the more bullets you're adding into the chambers. Now, does that necessarily mean it's going to, spin around and land on a bullet? No, but it could. And the more bullets you put in there, the more likely it is to end up that way. So I take it from the perspective, well, I'm going to take as many bullets out of the chamber as I can. And that's all you can do. Right. And does that mean I'm guaranteed? No. I could have really bad luck and that one bullet can still hit me, but I'm going to play the averages, which I think most people would do. And I want to put those odds in my favor, so that's how you do it.
I mean, may the odds ever be in your favor, really.
That's right. I was just thinking of that myself. It does feel like we're living in the Hunger Games.
Right. I think my district, down here would come out on top, by the way. I think the southeast region of the country would probably win the Hunger Games,
I don't know. New Yorkers are pretty tough.
Yeah, New York too. I was thinking we just have the crazy people down here,
Yeah, it's hard to account for crazy. That's true.
Yeah, Florida man,
Yep.
Everyone knows the story of Florida man. So, any parting thoughts you want to leave with people as we move on to next week?
Well, I think a dose of perspective is good, whether it's for us as adults or for the kids. And I think talking to our kids about this is important, and I think talking to each other too. We're not on islands here, even though we feel like we are. We're still connected, and if you have fears, you have concerns, share them, and same with your kids. So don't be afraid to share, and don't be afraid to be vulnerable. And if you're vulnerable, ask for help. And, you know, don't be afraid to accept the advice from someone who knows what they're talking about too, you know, and that's hard to do. That's hard to, you know, because it seems like on Facebook, everyone's an expert.
Yeah.
So, you know, find someone you trust who knows what they're talking about, and, you know, believe in it. So.
Yeah. And, you know, Google something before you share it, you know, just
yes. Yeah, maybe just, you know, just a little reference search, just a little bit.
Just a little tiny before you share it out to 1,000 people that you're friends with on Facebook, maybe just check it a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it's just, if you got,
that would be helpful sometimes.
You know, if you're at home quarantine and you got a little bit of time, just a thought, you know.
Yeah, because no one has any time. I mean.
No. So yeah, maybe just do that. I don't know. It's a thought, you know. Good deal, man. Well, thanks again for this. We will do it next week. We might have another person next week. We'll see what happens.
That'd be great.
That'd be really cool. Though I enjoy it just with this, so this is fine. And yeah, this is week number 2. We're gonna keep doing this, and I'm excited about it. So
awesome.
Thanks, guys. We will see you next Thursday. Hopefully, Mike will get this up quicker this time. We'll see what happens. But Thursday afternoon usually gets published. So we'll see you then. Thanks.